So, let's talk about World War I. But instead of seeing it as just one big event, I want you to think of it like a catastrophic chain reaction. You know, like a series of dominoes, where one tips over, and then the next, and the next, until the whole world is caught in the fallout.
And it all kicks off with a question that honestly sounds kind of crazy. How could a mistake as simple, as human, as a driver taking a wrong turn down a city street end up sparking a war that would kill millions and literally reshape the modern world?
Because that's what happened. That one small error was the first domino, and it led to a conflict so massive, so unbelievably brutal, that by the time it was over, more than 16 million people, soldiers and civilians, were dead. So how did we get from a wrong turn to this? Let's break it down.
Okay, so our story begins on a single fateful day in Sarajevo. This is where a bizarre series of coincidences and one critical mistake lit the fuse on a global catastrophe.
Here's the scene. It's June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary is in town. An assassination attempt on his motorcade already failed earlier that day. So what happens? His driver, trying to get away, takes a wrong turn, and by sheer unbelievable chance, he stalls the car right in front of one of the conspirators. The shots fired in that moment, well, they were the spark that ignited a continent-sized powder keg.
So you have to ask, why was Europe so ready to explode? The assassination was just the trigger, right? The really explosive conditions had been building up for decades.
It really boiled down to three main things. First, you had imperialism. All these major powers were fiercely competing, scrambling for colonies and resources. Then, you had this intense nationalistic pride, where every country was absolutely convinced of its own greatness, fueling all these rivalries. And the final piece of the puzzle was a super complicated web of mutual alliances, which basically guaranteed that if two countries went to war, everyone else was getting dragged in with them.
And this is where that whole domino effect really kicks into high gear. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. So Russia, who's allied with Serbia, starts to mobilize its army. That makes Germany nervous, so they declare war on Russia. Next thing you know, France and Great Britain are pulled in, and just like that, the continent is split into two sides, the Allied powers and the Central Powers. A small regional fight had just snowballed into a world war.
Now, the sheer scale of this war was matched only by its brutality. This was something different. This was war on a level the world had never, ever seen before.
You see, for the first time, you had the full, terrifying power of the Industrial Revolution unleashed on the battlefield. But these new technologies didn't make the war any faster. Nope, they just made killing way more efficient, which led to a level of carnage that was just unimaginable. I mean, just think about some of this stuff. Airplanes had only been around for about a decade. At first, they were just used for spying, but they quickly turned into deadly armed fighter planes. Both sides started using horrific chemical weapons, things like mustard and chlorine gas. And deep under the ocean, German U-boats or submarines were wrecking supply ships, completely changing the game of naval warfare forever.
But if there's one image that defines World War I, it's this: trench warfare. To shield themselves from all the new machine guns and artillery shells, armies on both sides dug thousands of miles of these deep, muddy ditches. It led to this miserable, hellish stalemate, where you could lose thousands of men trying to gain just a few feet of ground.
And this quote, wow, it just cuts right to the bone. It's from the journal of Horace Pippin, a soldier in the famous African-American unit, the Harlem Hellfighters. Them lonely, cootie, muddy trenches. He sums it all up. It wasn't just the constant danger. It was the filth, the lice, the mud, the disease, and the absolute psychological torture of living in those holes day after day. The fighting finally stops in 1918, but the story isn't over. In fact, the way the war ended would create a so-called peace that was just as unstable as the time before it. The last few dominoes were about to fall.
So the war officially wraps up with the Treaty of Versailles. But listen, this was not a treaty about reconciliation. Not at all. This was designed to punish Germany. It stripped away its territory, dismantled its military, and, this is the big one, forced Germany to take all the blame for the war and pay absolutely crippling financial damages.
And you can probably see where this is going. The treaty was so harsh that it sent the German economy into a total collapse. This created massive resentment and anger, which was the perfect breeding ground for extremist nationalist groups to take hold. And that right there is what set the stage for Adolf Hitler and an even deadlier world war just a couple of decades later.
And if you want to understand just how crushing this was, get this. The reparations debt forced on Germany was so huge that the final payment wasn't made until 2010. Yeah, you heard me right, 2010. 91 years. That long shadow of debt fueled instability for generations.
So it leaves us with this really tough question, doesn't it? World War I was famously called the war to end all wars. But all its ending really did was pave the way for a sequel that was even more destructive. It forces us to ask, what is the true price of peace? And can a victory ever really be a victory if it just plants the seeds for the next war?